Ever heard of a haunted land? A place that's known to hold hundreds of weird and unsolved cases among decades and maybe centuries. Do they really exist? I mean, we heard before that about a haunted house, a haunted mansion, a haunted apartment. But a haunted land? A little strange, right? Let me tell you a little story about a town called Wilder, which is a small town in Kentucky, south of Newport. There, you will meet one of the most good-looking buildings in the United States of America, a music club named Bobby Mackey's Music World. This building is known to have all kinds of activities held within it. For example, if you want old country music, you will find some drinks, games, money. It is there, and of course ghosts and demons sure exist. The Mackey Club is famous for having everything and its opposite, good and bad, night and day, humans and demons. If we took few steps back, we will find that this reputation for the land had started long centuries ago. The land from which is a river, and without it this is the place of a permanent conflict and will not end between the Native American tribes, specifically the Cherokee and the Shawnee tribes. Through the arrival of settlers in the 18th century, at that time, the area was marked by the enemy of Leech Station, after Major David Leech, the owner of the land, who took it in appreciation of his role in the American War of Independence, until the 50s of the 19th century when they built a slaughterhouse on the ground. The slaughterhouse in which thousands of animals died and their blood was being filtered. At that time they were leaving the ground drinking all this blood until the US government interfered with environmental protection laws and waste disposal regulations. At that time the subject changed a little and began to happen, directing all of this waste and blood through a hole dug in the building to reach the river, whose dead were polluted and colored red every time the slaughterhouse was disposing of the waste in it. It is true that this slaughterhouse was closed in the 90s of the 19th century, but apparently what happened before it was closed made the land thirsty for blood all the time. In 1896, a beautiful and energetic young woman was murdered brutally in this place, and her head was separated from her body. Her name was Pearl Bryan, and she was 22 years old. There is no confirmed story that tells us who killed her or why, but in one of the popular stories it is said that the killer was her lover Scott Jackson. He killed her with the help of his friend and threw her head into the side river bank, which was transporting blood to the river as a sacrifice to Satan in order to open a gateway to hell. This gate was never closed until this very day. This cursed gate is located inside the basement of the Mackey Club. Because of this crime, the government decided to demolish this abandoned slaughterhouse, paving the normal, and the situation continued in this way until around 1933. Buck Brady was a person who was known for his bad reputation. Buck built a club that was an architectural masterpiece, a mixture of white and red, marble floors, a big chandelier. And the club was called Da Primrose. It was a 5-star club and restaurant, consisting of 5 floors. Shows and parades did not stop at them. And the Spring Flower turned into a celebration place for music lovers, a place that was all eating, drinking, and dancing. Primrose was so successful to the extent that it draws people away from another club named Beverly Hills Country Club, a club that was owned by a famous criminal gang called the Cleveland Syndicate in Newport. Of course, they were silent about Brady's success in this way, so they decided to sell him a famous criminal named Red Masterson to persuade him to sell them the place. And Brady decided to respond to the offer with their belongings in his own way. Masterson waited and ambushed him in the club's car park and hit him with fire in an attempt to assassinate him. But this attempt failed, and Masterson was wounded, but he preferred to live. Of course, Bradley was arrested and tried on charges of attempted murder, but Masterson refused to testify against him in order to get out and take revenge on him himself. And Bradley understood this, so he decided to work with him a peace treaty and the club to the gang in exchange for his life. He got out of prison and escaped to Florida and retired from the crime there. As for the club, it remained under the control of the Cleveland Group, which changed its activities and called it the Latin Quarter Club and reopened it again. Want to know the weird part? The Latin Quarter Club achieved more success than the Primrose Club, and it remained one of the largest entertainment establishments in all of America. But the status quo is impossible, as we know. During this overwhelming success period, a terrible tragedy occurred. They had a very famous and unpopular dancer called Joanna. Joanna fell in love with the talented singer Robert Randall. Their relationship continued until it reached the father of Joanna, who was a famous gangster. And he tried to keep the two away from each other in various ways, but they refused to distance themselves from each other and decided to stick to each other no matter what happened. So Joanna's father, Adam, didn't have one solution. Randall was killed, and then Joanna, whose heart was broken by the death of her lover, she tried to name her family in revenge for the death of her lover. And when she failed, She poisoned herself in the clothes in the basement of the club. But the issue has no effect on the reputation and success of the club, which is a continuous and complimentary favor until the end of 1961, when the American government decided to control the gangs and eliminate the criminal activity in this region. They destroyed all the gambling equipment in the club and locked it down completely. After that, more than one club or bar was opened in the area, and all of them were suspicious and affiliated with criminal organizations. The last of which was a club for motorbike gangs, which preferred to continue until the early 70s, when there was a series of shootings that eventually led to the closure of the place. During spring of 1978, it was the start of the final chapter in this haunted land story, especially when the famous music star, Bobby McGee, bought the land and decided to open a large music club on it. A place that would be a destination for music lovers, a place where he could meet the people he loved at any time without appearing or formal parties. But as soon as the club doors opened to receive his fans, scary things started to happen. Janet Mackey, his first wife, was the first person who said that she felt that the place was not normal and that there was an unconfirmed sense of what would happen, especially when she told about the invisible spectrum that attacked her in the place. And then along, Carl Lawson decided to speak. Carl was one of the workers who worked at the place. He said that he faced a frightening entity that he wanted to eliminate. Many workers said that they had seen the ghost of Six wearing a white dress cut off, but its shape was frightening in the atmosphere of the club. But many other things like that. The ghost of an angry cowboy is awake. That is, someone goes down the basement to attack him. Frightening shadows appear in the empty windows. The sound of terrifying screams that continues throughout the night without stopping. Mysterious forces holding people up and throwing them as if they are playing on the ceiling and the walls. The sounds of scribbling, the sounds of needs creeping on the floor, and other terrifying needs that crept up the whole place. It is said that the number of spirits and demons inhabiting the place reached more than 40 demons and souls, and that no one was able to expel them from the place due to their large number, and therefore all the exorcism sessions that were performed failed miserably. The building is still there until today, and who knows what's going to happen in the upcoming years. I'll be checking the news on this haunted land every now and then, and will surely update the description if I ever made a new updated episode. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more untouched haunted stories. Thanks for listening. Until next time. One day, while I was surfing the deep web, I came across a forum where people post random horror stories that they went through, and from 10th of stories, I came up to one of them that made me speechless, and I wanted to share with you guys. In the next few minutes, I'll be reading the post as the publisher wrote it. Let's start. I met her in a restaurant, New Year's Eve. The restaurant was very crowded, and all the people were sitting together except for us. We had multiple eye contact since I entered the restaurant, and at that time, I knew, no, we both knew, that there is no one here alone but us. After eating and few wine glasses, the world seemed nicer, and due to the influence of the music playing in the restaurant, I gathered my courage and walked towards her table. I asked her if we could sit together. She smiled and said, "Please, of course." I pulled up the chair and sat down, saying, "I was afraid that you would be waiting for someone." She laughed as she said, "And I was waiting for you to make the approach." I laughed from my heart. She had a sweet sense of humor, and her soul was sweet that it makes your heart melts. She had a stylish curly black hair, a clear white skin, and shining brown eyes. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. She asked me about the reason that made me spend the new year alone. I smiled and told her, "This is my bet with luck. I do this every year. If I met someone nice, then it'll be a blessed year. If not, then it won't be a good one." Of course, I had to ask her the same question. All of a sudden, the smile disappeared from her face while saying, "My husband." I asked her in astonishment, "Are you married?" She said to me sadly and broken, "I was married until he decided to let me go and run away with his secretary. He was cheating on me, and I knew it. I never thought that he'd actually run away and choose her over me." I noticed that the conversation really troubled her, so I decided to talk to her about something else. Eventually, she got back to her lovely persona and smiled again. She was really nice. I don't know how her husband betrayed her in the first place. She drank a little more while we were still sitting, and in no time she started losing control of herself. Her voice kept getting louder and her laughter getting bigger, and at that time, all the people in the restaurant were looking towards us. I grabbed her by her hand and we went out. I laid her on a chair in the bus station, waiting for any bus to show up so she can get back home. I tried to ask her from her address in order to request an Uber for her or stop a taxi for her, but she was overdrunk and could never remember any of those details to give. By this moment, I had no choice but to search up her handbag for any card that has her address on it. That or we sit here for hours till she starts to sober up again. After checking her bag, I found nothing but some keys and her credit cards and some tissues, nothing else. At that moment, I decided to take her back home with me, at least till she get a little bit better. I was not gonna leave her drunk in the middle of the street. I took her from her hand and we walked until we reached my car. I laid her in the back seat. Then I drove and took the longer road in order to reach my home. I could have taken a shorter way, but this way is better and safer. I was lucky that my home is in an isolated part of the city, and this is fine. I don't want someone from the neighbors to ask me about her and why she's unconscious. We arrived home. She was asleep and completely unable to wake up. I had to go open the house door first and then go back to the car and carry her in. And by the way, I am a respectful man, so I've taken her to a room other than the one I sleep in. I don't want her to wake up and find herself beside me and think that I did something to her while she was drunk. I woke up in the morning with her loud voice and continuous screams, and as I told you, I was lucky that there are no neighbors around. I opened the door to the basement and went down the stairs to see her. It turned out to be that when she woke up and found herself tied in the wall of my basement with chains, she was terrified. I saw her freaking out, not believing she's chained up and down to the wall. I said, "Good morning, sweetie." She shouted among her tears, "Who are you? And why are you doing this to me?" I wondered if I'm that much unremarkable to people. I met her yesterday and she don't even remember me. I replied to her while keeping my smile. "My name is Damien. We met yesterday at the restaurant. You were staying up late by yourself and I came back to you, and before I continue, she interrupted me shouting, 'I know how we met. I think I remember that. What I'm asking now is who are you?' My smile became wider when I said, 'It's good. You shortened the distances to me. As I told you, my name is Damien, and I know your husband, and I know where he and his secretary disappeared.' Her eyes widened in horror as she said, 'Seriously, where? You must say.' I laughed on her way before saying, 'You are a very bad actress. You knew that your husband betrayed you with his secretary, and you tricked them in order to catch them red-handed in your house. And after that, you killed them and cut their bodies into parts. And lastly, you buried them in the forest, which leaves me wondering how the police did not consider you as a main suspect in the case with that bad acting of yours. But in any ways, bravo. You almost did a perfect crime, but unlucky you are that I'm here and I caught you." She angrily said to me he had to die. I sacrificed everything for him. I gave him everything and stood beside him until he became a successful person. It is not acceptable to be that my reward. I raised my shoulders indifferently as I said, "This is not justified. Even if he betrayed you, it doesn't make him deserve to be killed." She stared at me for a minute and then asked, "Are you a relative of John?" "A relative of Madeleine, his secretary. Who are you?" I laughed from my heart as I said, "I am neither this nor this. Am just a journalist obsessed with solving crimes that are tying up against an unknown, a genius, and using my genius to achieve justice." She asked me in fear, "Will you hand me over to the police?" I laughed as I grabbed the knife that was on the table near me and said, "No, I am doing justice in my own way." That was the content of the post I saw on the deep web. Nobody knows who's the publisher of the post, neither if it's true or not. The publisher never got back online to the forum, so it's up to us to decide if it's true or not. What do you think? Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell icon to receive the next stream before anybody else. One day, around 2 in the morning, a black SUV car stopped in front of an old cabin in the woods. The cabin was literally in the middle of a forest in an extremely rural area. The cabin was rusty, and the place was all frightening. The wind was howling, full moon was in the cloudy sky. Suddenly the car door opened, and a man got off from the car with one of the prettiest girls you could ever see. They walked slowly towards the cabin. The man opened the cabin door with utmost confidence and entered without hesitating for a moment. The girl asked him in fear, "Is this the cabin?" He said with a gentle smile, "Yes, come on, let's get inside." She was a little bit hesitated by now, but quickly settled her thoughts and entered. He locked the door before her and quietly asked her, "Do you know what they say here about Halloween night? That it's the scariest night in the whole year?" "No, I didn't know," she said in surprise. He curiously asked her, "Do you know why they even say that about Halloween night?" She answered, "No." He smiled and said, "I'll tell you. Roughly 20 years ago, this cabin was left empty and broken in every possible way. Just like how it is now, sometimes the hunters would stay the night at this cabin. But the weird thing that in one Halloween night they found a dead body of a young girl. Here, in this cabin, she was murdered. The crime was very cruel and brutal. They say that the killer had pierced her eyes, so they stay wide open. In order to make his face the last thing she see, he hung her from her neck with a hook in the ceiling like a deer. He opened up her belly, took her stomach out. That belly hole reached the edge of her neck. Most of the organs were on the ground. This ground we're standing on. Her blood was poured into the ground of the cabin. It was terrifying. All of this happened while she was still alive. Her death was slow and painful." The girl screamed at him, "Enough. Why are you telling me this?" He said with amazement, "You're the one who asked me, didn't you?" Anyways, the case remained unsolved, and the murderer was never found. They say that during every Halloween night of every year at the same time, if we paid attention, we would hear the screams of pain of that poor girl. Then suddenly she shouted at him, "You invented this story all to scare me, right?" He quickly answered, "No, this is the truth." She sadly replied, "Are you happy? I'm terrified." He smiled a strange smile as he said, "I swear to you that this is the real story. I wonder how you have not heard about this story. I thought that it was going viral at some point, and everyone knows it by now." She fearfully said, "No, I have not heard this story before. I am afraid. Can we leave now?" He replied, "Leave. This is the most important night of the year, and you know we both love creepy stuff. That's why we came here in the first place." She replied, "If I had known this story before coming here, I would never agree to come. I want to leave and just walk from here now, please." He said to her, "No, we will be sitting here for a while. I want to hear her screaming." She said angrily, "And I don't want. My whole body is shivering, and I can't handle it anymore." He said sarcastically, "The keys of the car are with me, and I'm actually thinking of locking you in here and just leave by myself. I would like you to spend the night here alone." She felt fear. She was about to cry while she was saying, "No, please, never do that to me." She tried to open the cabin door, but the ball came out in her hand. She gasped in fear as Laura came back. Before she said, shivering with fear, "You are joking. I want to get out of here immediately." He was watching, smiling. She ran towards the door of the cabin again, tried to open it, slammed on the door, terrified, until she realized something. He was silent for the past whole 10 minutes, the scary type of silence. She turned herself around in eagerness and fear. He was there, standing in the darkness, watching her and smiling. He said sarcastically, "What? Are you afraid?" His right hand was behind his back. He began to slowly getting it out, and in his hand, there was an old rusty hook. She screamed in fear. "What is happening?" "I adore Halloween night," he replied while enjoying her fear. "Unfortunately, it is only one night a year." She began to beg him in fear, "Stop, and just let her leave." But he could not hear her. He continued his words, and his eyes glittered with intense enthusiasm. "For 20 years I have been here. Girls have changed, but I didn't. All of them are like you. Stupid and never pay attention to small details between the lines. But that doesn't matter, as I always succeed in bringing them here. She fell to her knees, begging in horror. He smiled and said, "In sake of the legend, I have to keep people away from the cabin. They must hear your voice while you scream." He raised his hook up and said, "I'm sorry, but your death is the only way that will let the legend continue." With her loud screaming, everyone heard it. And for another year, on Halloween night, people heard the voice of the girl screaming from the cabin, and the legend continued. Hey guys, thanks for listening. That was the legend of the Halloween cabin. Nobody knows exactly where it's located, but few guys on social media have said they actually heard screaming from the land picket forest of California during Halloween. Hope you enjoyed the story, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. The following story happened during the summer of 2013. Back then I was still a law school student. One day, while I was on my way home after a very tiring day, a nice little girl stood up to me while I was walking and listening to some music. I took my earphones off and looked at her. I guess her age was averaging between 5 and 6 years old. She suddenly held my hand while begging me to help her, as her mother needed help. She said, "I don't know why. I don't know for what reason, but I found myself walking with her. We walked together for about 9 or 10 streets. She was still holding my hand all the way until we reached a public park, which was full of trees and different types of swings and some games for kids. But yet, the garden was completely empty. I don't know why. During that time of the day, most gardens used to have families and their kids around. Once we entered the garden, she pulled my hand and walked towards the far end of the garden. I gradually started to notice an old woman sitting on a wooden bench under the tree. The girl said cheerfully to her mother, "Mom, someone finally agreed to come," but her mother was silent. She didn't even blink. Moments later, I heard her slowly saying, "I'm sorry, my daughter," but as soon as I heard her voice, the blood dried up in my veins. There was something wrong with her voice. My body began to shake in an unnatural way. There was something unusual about her voice. I felt that I wanted to escape from this place as quickly as possible. Then suddenly the little girl said cheerfully, "Wanna play with me?" Before I answered her, she was running in the direction of a big slide. On the other hand, her mother said with a frightening voice the same phrase again, "I am sorry, my daughter." I still cannot see her whole face. She didn't move an inch from her place since we entered. But the way she speaks was terrifying. My body was shivering, and the cold sweat has begun to cover my face. Behind me, the girl was climbing up the slide. In front of me, the woman sitting without a movement. And my side, the sun is setting and the darkness has begun to fill the whole place. I asked her anxiously, "Your daughter brought me here. May I know why, and why me in particular, exactly at this moment?" As if she was awaiting my question, she suddenly shouted in fear as she called to her daughter, "Jenny." Her voice was frightening. I heard a hitting sounds from the side of the slides that the girl was playing on. I was surprised when I saw the girl on the ground after falling from above the slide, and now she is on the ground, not moving. Her face is pale. Her eyes are fading, and a pool of blood expanding around her brain slowly. I was barely breathing at this moment. I wanted to run. I wanted to call the police, the ambulance. But fear was crippling me in my place. I couldn't move. I looked in the direction of the woman's seat chair once again. She was still sitting in place. I didn't understand. "Why are you not trying to help your daughter? Why don't you try to find her?" At this moment, I was able to move. I walked towards the woman and decided to turn around her and actually talk to her and see her face. And at that very moment, I saw something I'll never forget among my lifetime. I screamed with horror as I returned back quickly. The woman was. She was dead. Her face was blue, her eyes swollen, her tongue peeking out from between her lips. And I noticed a blue scarf wrapped around her neck tightly. This scarf was tied to the tree above it. The lady was hanged to death. Very slowly she said, "I'm sorry, my daughter. I couldn't bear more than this." The world started to spin. and within a few moments, everything turned black. I fainted. When I gained my conscious again and opened my eyes, I was on the ground. The world was very dark, and the garden was completely empty. I shook with fear and ran as fast as I could towards my home. After arriving home, I started searching on the internet until I encountered news that made me understand exactly what happened, and even understand the reason behind the apologies that the woman kept saying over and over for her daughter Jenny. This girl was playing around in the park and her mother was distracted from her for moments. It was enough for the girl to fall from the slide and die immediately. The mother entered into a fit of grief. She was feeling that her negligence was the cause of her daughter's death, so that she returned the garden and hung herself next to this slide. That's why the lady was saying sorry for her girl over and over again. After that, their souls never left the park. The poor little girl and her depressed mother's soul. This park has been deserted since that day. All people avoid it and stay away from it. But I know that they are there, and I know they're waiting for their next victim. We all see online ads on almost every website and every platform nowadays. We come across at least 100 ads per day, even if we don't care about them or their details. But not all ads are the same. Sometimes we see an ad for some products that looks like a gold mine, where the product is highly valuable and the seller is selling it for really cheap price. This was exactly the ad that appeared on one of the ads on Craigslist. A PlayStation 5, brand new with all of its accessories. Price $100. Selling for reasons of travel, as you do feel about it now. You see the ad as a once-in-a-lifetime bargain. It attracts anyone's attention, no matter who is not interested. But if you are not greedy, not stupid, or not thinking that you are one of the 10 smartest people on the surface of the planet, and want to take advantage of this opportunity, it is necessary to draw attention to some needs. You should never ignore it. Like what? You said. First, the product image is not a real-life photo of PlayStation 5. It's a screenshot for the console from the internet. Second, the price is under 1/5 of the market price range for this product. It's impossible for anyone to sell for that fraction of a price of newly purchased console. Third, the name of the advertiser is not real. This is a fake name. There is no real person who calls himself the Cookies Lover 123. Fourth, the meeting place. An old deserted house in a remote area with no residents, on the borders of a poor village. If you are a sane person and you have a little mind and a logical thinking within your head, you'll know that it is impossible for you to bother with advertisements like that, and it is very, very clear that the ad is not accurate, and that there is something wrong indeed. Although not a small number of people were calling the owner of the ad, some of them had cold feet in the last moments. And this segment of buyers is not our concern. What's more important to us is the buyers who are actually willing to meet the seller to buy the console. Of course, as a nice seller, it is necessary to give your guests a drink before sitting down and talk about the details of the sale. And of course, the drink will not be clear of drugged sleep pills. After the drink, the poor victim is chained to the wall. He wakes up to find himself tied up and anchored to the wall with old chains. And from here the game will begin. The seller will be interested in feeding his victim in order to keep him alive for as long as possible. At the same time, the victim is forced to bear the pain and tortures till he finally loses his last breath in his body, while collapsing, and finally dies. Sounds creepy, right? It gets better. With all of this weird scenario, there is a question that raises itself. Why does the seller do that? In fact, his answer is very logical and easy. It works for two reasons. First, because it makes him happy. His sense of control over his victims and his strength in the face of their weakness, avenging his weakness in front of his father's strength throughout his childhood. Now is the time when he will be strong and others weak. Second, for the one who reaches this place, there will be one of two. They are either greedy and stupid, or they are naive and don't deserve to survive. He believed the world will be better without them. So the salesman will make a favor for the world and save it from those parasites. But for every smart guy, there's a smarter one waiting for his turn, right? A well-known rule, and the seller learned it the hard way. One day, a person called him and was very interested about the product he was selling, and the seller was able to seduce him to come over to the edge of the deserted house. And when the buyer came, the seller welcomed him over an excuse to go get them some drinks. When he stood up to go to the kitchen in order to bring him the drink in which the drug was in, he got a hit with solid stick on his head. He lost conscious right away. Imagine the hunter's feeling of his arrogance when he encounters himself a victim tied in the wall by his own chains in the same place of his victims. Allow me to introduce myself to you. I am Sam Leonard, one of the few smart people on this planet, and my mission was to cleanse the earth from brutal people, greedy people, the too kind and nice people. All of those do not have a place here with us. And my strategy was successful to the extent that my arrogance blinded me. When I didn't see the iron stick, which was in the hands of the peaceful buyer, Mr. Adam is standing in front of me now. He is the one who hit me, and he is the one who tied me up here. Introduced himself. He's John's father. John was one of my victims. I wanted to tell him about the place of his son's body, but unfortunately the dogs eat all the flesh, and then I threw all of the remaining bones at the river. An easy way to get rid of the bodies of my victims easily. Mr. Adam taught me an important lesson. There's always smarter guys in the room, and not all of the people who calls me are greedy or naive victims. After the seller confessed his crimes, he said, "Mr. Adam, I recorded everything about my murders on the tape as you requested. May you please let me go now?" Mr. Adam did not reply. Instead, he went to the table and grabbed a hook. The seller shouted, "Mr. Adam, please let me go. Please put the hook back." "Mr. Adam, we agreed you will turn me into the police once I confess." "Mr. Adam, please." And that was it. Days later, the police had an anonymous call about that house. After arriving, they found the tape with the full confession of the crimes the seller did. And beside the tape was his dead body, or should I say, his body in pieces. Until this very moment, nobody knows who is Mr. Adam. Of course, there is no Mr. Adam, and it was just a fake name the man used. If there's only one thing I know about women, it'll be that all of them have something towards flowers. That's why the clever man knows that no matter how big his mistake is, he can fix it all with a nice bouquet of flowers. Anyways, let me tell you about Nicole, the prettiest girl I've ever seen. The first time I saw her, my heartbeat started racing. I knew that she is the one whom I want to be with for the rest of my life. She was a student at the university, and I was a professor at the same university. And our law here is clear and explicit, in which it prohibits any relationship of any kind between any professor and a student. And since she is not one of my students, and our roads rarely intersect, I had to find a way to get to know her, so I thought a lot. And I found that there's nothing better than a clear and honest behavior, so I waited for the right time and decided to go and get to know her like any respectable man. But her looks were ridiculous, the way that she rejected me and hearing her friends calling me names I do not want to remember. Anyways, that was harsh and sort of unforgivable. But you know where the biggest problem was? It was in my heart. I could not distance her from my mind or nullify her attachment to my heart even after what she did to me. So I had to find another way to make her fall in love with me. After a little thought, I encountered a genius idea, and I will go on with it. I'll update you once it's finished. 2 days have passed now. She finally got up, but unfortunately she found herself tied in a big chair with a thick rope and iron chains. She tried to scream, but the cloth that was wrapped in her mouth prevented her from doing so. She failed to untie herself. She was completely paralyzed. The fear was cured in her eyes. Her body was trembling. I decided to intervene. I came out of the shadows, and when she saw me, her eyes widened. Her fear increased. I smiled while untying her in order to make her calm down a little bit. Once her legs and hands were free, she pushed me on the ground and ran towards the basement stairs and tried to open the door. I laughed. She was stupid. Did she think that I'll miss a detail like that? I came up the stairs after her. While feeling extremely angry, I pulled her hair and threw her on the stairs, watched her with her body rolling. I slowly went down the stairs again and started to hit her with my leg. I heard her screaming. I saw her blood coming down from her mouth. And even though that was difficult for me to watch her suffer, I still had to teach her a lesson so that she don't resist or reject me ever again. I pulled her hair and dragged her across ground of the basement. I laid her on the chair once again and tied her more aggressively than the first time and told her angrily, "You'll stay like this for 2 days, without food or water, and the duration will increase each time you will not obey my orders." But I have a good heart, as you know, so that the next day she woke up to find herself untied. And in front of her I kept a small table with some fresh food and a bouquet of white roses in the shape of a heart. She ate like crazy. She was very hungry indeed. I smiled when she saw the roses and promised her that if she was polite, I would bring her a bed here so that she could sleep comfortably, and would even bring her a small oven so that she could cook for me and for herself to eat. And because I am an honest man, and I never break my words, after 2 days, she was polite and listened to my orders, so I fulfilled my promise to her and brought her a bed to sleep on. The next day I woke up to the sound of the basement door opening. Apparently I forgot to lock it properly. But before she opened the door of the house, I was right behind her. I hit her with a baseball bat on the head, and when she fell on the ground, I pulled her hair on the floor and threw her from the stairs of the basement. This bitch is not appreciating anything I do for her. This time when she got up, she was tied from her neck to a collar and sleeping in the house of the dog. I left her like that for 2 days. If she got out of the doghouse, I extremely hit her. I didn't serve her any food except old nasty dry food and dirty water. But I have a good heart. So after 2 days, I brought her the beautiful bouquet of yellow roses for her goodness. And for the second time I told her, as long as you listen to my orders and be polite, you will live a comfortable life with me. Apparently, she learned her lesson, because when I came back from work and met her, she prepared something for me to eat with a beautiful smile. She was wearing a nice dress from the ones I bought for her. I changed my clothes quickly and went down the basement. The atmosphere was romantic and everything was sweet. At that time I felt that I did the right thing. My heartbeats were racing while I was looking into her pretty eyes. I tried to feed her from my plate, but I noticed that she didn't want to. She did not want to even touch any food from my plate. That was strange, and I was about to let this go and just keep on eating. But my brain was not quite. Her refusal raised my doubts. I stood from my chair, and I walked towards her. The fear that was in her eyes made me feel that I was stronger. I planted a fork in her neck as I said, "You really think that I don't know that you went upstairs after opening the door of the basement while I was not home? You seriously think that I didn't count my sleeping pills that were behind the bathroom mirror?" She tried to speak, but I pushed the fork ever further inside her neck, saying, "I will tell you what happened. You went out and tried to open the door of the house, but unfortunately you found that the doors and windows are all sealed and closed. You could have tried to scream, but the house here has no neighbors around. You decided to look around trying to find knives or whatever you can use to stand against me with it, but all the kitchen drawers are locked up with large padlocks. You finally found the sleeping pills which I was using on you in order to make you faint, and then you decided to act all romantic as if you ever loved me. Right." Before she responded, I pulled the fork out and stabbed her again in the neck, saying, "Your plan was that I would eat and sleep, and you would turn on the keys and run away. Like if I was a naive man and will not have thought of all of this." I threw her on the ground and came out of the basement, my whole body trembling with anger. I sat there full of hate towards her while the pool of blood increased around her body. 3 days have passed. I know that you are upset with me, but you need to know if that you are the reason for all this. Why did you do that, Nicole? Why do you keep denying our love? I know that you will not know how to respond to me, but I am really upset with you. I finished my last words while placing a red rose bouquet on the grave that I had dug for her in the garden of my house. As I told you, there's no woman out there that don't like roses, and the clever man knows that no matter how big his mistake is, a flower bouquet can make her fall back for him again. I smiled and said, "I hope you are not upset with me any longer. I have to say goodbye now as I'm late on my dinner with my new girlfriend. She's waiting for me in the basement. Wish me luck. I hope this time is better than the past 3 failed attempts." My daughter's name is Amanda, and she is 6 years old. A beautiful little girl, polite and shy, but a little introverted. She do not have many friends, and usually she spends her time playing with her toys. Even when we decided to move out from the city in which we live to another city because of my work conditions, she had no problem with it. The second day she just said goodbye to her few friends, our neighbors, and the teachers, and just like that, she was ready to move. But deep down, I was very worried about her. Changes like home and town are not always an easy thing for kids to adapt with, let alone a little girl who is introverted, but I had hoped that maybe she'll like the new house. It was a huge house with a front garden, a house that is really sweet and spacious and almost looks like a palace. And as I expected, Amanda adapted to the new house quickly. The only problem was that there were no children of her age in the area we were in, which means that she will not have friends and she will not find someone to play with. And therefore, with the more time we spend here, she will become more lonely and more introverted than any time before. I decided to try to help her, so I made a big swing attached to the branch of the largest tree in our front garden. But the strange thing is that somehow she was more introverted, that she spent long hours there on the swing just by herself. As the days went by, she was behaving in a strange and incomprehensible way. She almost stopped talking to us and kept spending her time alone, far from us, sitting on the swing all day long while she was speaking to herself. Of course, as a father, I was worried about her. One day I asked her, "Who do you speak to every day while sitting alone on the swing?" She told me, "This is my fictional friend Daddy. Her name is Sarah." As much as it was strange, just as it was normal for me, I am an educated man and I understood that imaginary friends are a natural thing in this age, especially for my daughter as she's an introvert type of a kid. But the problem was not during the day. The biggest problem was during the night. Amanda was suffering from strange dreams and frightening nightmares. She was screaming and screaming while she was asleep, so much so that on one night my wife woke me up from sleep due to loud voices downstairs, and she was afraid that maybe someone broke into the house. I gathered my courage and went out to see what was happening. I found out that Amanda literally broke a lot of stuff in the house. She was walking while sleeping. The strange thing about the issue is that her eyes were wide open. I tried waking her up and calling her name many times until she woke up, but she did not understand why and how she came here and did not recall anything that happened after she went to sleep. Since that day, the sleepwalking issue began to worsen. Every night she was getting further while sleepwalking. I was afraid that one night she might open the door and get out on the street where a car might hit her or something. I decided to take her to a hospital so that they could inspect her case and see the cause of the sleepwalking problem. They decided to keep her in the hospital for 2 days under observation. During the 2 days, she slept normally, without nightmares, without screaming or snorting during sleep, and without walking at night. They told me that she is very normal, but they also advised me to take her to a psychiatrist so he can confirm if there's something psychologically wrong with her or not. Then I told the doctor about everything that happened. He smiled and said that everything I told him is pretty normal at her age, and that if I really want to help my daughter, I must start introducing her to real friends of her age. And as he suggested, I started doing so. She forced her to meet new friends of her again, and also to spend more time with them. But the strange thing is when she come back, she go to the swing and sit all by herself and to talk to her imaginary friend Sarah again. And the issue of sleepwalking remained, and even got worse as time passes. The nightmares began to affect her more, and the problem was that she began to go out of the house and walk in the garden while she was asleep, and in the morning she did not remember anything the past night, and all she say is that she is tired and exhausted as if she had not slept all night. One night, I woke up to the sound of her steps as she slowly descended the stairs, went out and saw her as she opened the door and went out toward the garden. This time, I decided to walk and see her while I was silent. I wouldn't wake her up. I want to know what she will do, and most importantly, why does she do that? She opened the door of the small hut in which there were gardening tools, and then she got out of the axe. The blood dried in my veins when I saw the axe in her hands while she was asleep. She She walked towards the swing, and as soon as she reached the tree, she began to say words in an incomprehensible and low voice. As she slowly digs under the tree, I approached her silently so she don't feel me coming. And at that time, I heard what she was saying. She was repeatedly saying, "I have to get out of here." I shouted to her in fear, "Amanda, get up." But she did not respond, as if she didn't even hear me or sensed my presence. She kept digging under the tree. Her body was shivering from the cold, but she was still sleeping and I did not know what she was doing. I had a crazy idea at the time. I shouted at her and asked her, "You are Sarah, right?" She slowly rolled her face and peeped towards me, and on her face was a pine of sadness. Her eyes were full of fear. She said with a whisper, "You must get me out of here." She fell on the ground unconscious. I ran towards her and was assured that she was breathing. I moved her back to her bedroom, and her mother sat beside her in order to take care of her. And then I went right back to the garden again. I must understand what is happening. I grabbed the axe and started digging around the tree, ignoring the fear that filled my heart. I wanted to understand. I wanted to find an explanation. I started digging more and more until the axe was stuck in a solid object. I looked down and saw it, something white in color. I stretched out my hand and removed dust from it. It was a skull, a human skull. I threw it with fear while I was running towards the house, and I called the police. For more than half an hour of them digging in the ground more further. Finally, they had grabbed the rest of the skeleton from under the ground, and they told me after some investigations that it was a skeleton of a girl who had been living in the city here for a long time and suddenly disappeared without leaving any trace. A girl named Sarah. Investigations also proved that this girl was brutally murdered. They arrested the person who was living in the house before me. He said that he was the one who killed her. He wanted to rape her, and when she resisted, he was afraid and killed her. He buried her in the front garden under the big tree, and he imagined that no one would ever know. The police took Sarah's bones and buried it properly and gave her a respectable funeral. After that, Amanda did not talk to her imaginary friend anymore, except that one time when she entered the house the day after Sarah's skeleton was buried. That day, Amanda said with a smile, "Sarah says thank you." Since that day, everything was back to normal, and we never heard about Amanda talking to Sarah again. I hope that she found peace. A few years ago, I had to move to my company's branch in Japan, and they told me that I'm going to stay in an apartment owned by the company's branch in there. But when I went there and checked the apartment, I was shocked to see how dirty it was, and as I always been a woman obsessed with hygiene, I started searching around the city for another suitable apartment where I could stay in. And after days of searching, I found it. It was an apartment to rent for a strangely cheap price, but since it was a suitable place and close to my place of work, I was cool with it. The apartment was made up of a bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom, but what was great about it is that although the bathroom was somehow small, yet it had a large metal bathtub. This is not usual to be inside rented apartments in this area. And during one night, I was in that bathtub, and while I was washing my hair, and the shampoo was all over my face while my eyes were fully closed, I felt a strange presence around me. I wiped some of the shampoo off my face, and with a glimpse I saw the hands of pale white, holding the end of the bathtub. I washed my whole face right away. I opened my eyes, and I looked around, but there was no strange thing in the bathroom. I tried to calm myself down and convince myself this was just illusions because of my eyes were full of shampoo. But what happened after a few days made me change my mind. For the second time, I was in the bathtub, and for the second time, I felt a strange feeling. This time I knew where I was supposed to look, and I saw them. The two hands that were pale white, and they were holding the edge of the bathtub. It was as if someone was trying to enter the bathtub without letting me sense his presence. I washed my face, but within seconds, everything was gone. There was nothing in it in the bathroom, except for fear that dominated me and made my whole body shiver. But I am sure of what I saw. This is the hands of a little child. I'm not crazy, I am sure. But after that, everything went normal until my day off came. I was allowed only one day off per month, and I used to spend the day in cleaning and tidying the place I live in. especially my room, which turns into a chaos that no one of you can imagine. I started to organize my stuff and arrange my clothes. I wanted to separate a few clothes from the rest, and then I took off few things from the closet and placed them in one of the drawers. I pulled the drawers from its place to organize my clothes inside them, but before I put it back in place, I felt something was stick to the drawer bottom board. I checked it and saw a picture of a small young child. Oddly enough, neither picture of the boy that put me in fear, nor the way it was stuck under the drawer. The strange thing was, it was his hands that I knew at the first sight. It was the same hands I saw twice while I was in the bathtub. My whole body started to shiver. I went out quickly and threw the picture in the garbage bin. And on the same night, I was staying up late in my room watching the TV when I heard a voice coming from the bathroom. I got up from my place while I was shivering and walked towards the bathroom door slowly. I opened the door and I got inside, and I was surprised to see that the bathtub was full of water, although I am sure that it was empty, but it does not matter. It's possible that I could have filled it and just forgot. I approached the bathtub in order to remove the stopper and put it out, but as soon as I bended down towards the bathtub, I saw a woman. She was standing right behind me. Her reflection was seen on the surface of the water. She was utterly ugly, with a gray lips. Her flesh was worn out, and her long black hair was frizzy all around her face, frightening the most. The look of evil and hatred that was in her eyes. Suddenly, and before I could understand what was going on, or even before taking any reaction, I felt strong hands holding my head from behind and dipping me in the water. I tried to resist, but it was unnaturally strong. I tried to push my head out of the water, but her hand was stronger than me. I was doing my best to hold and control the breath that was left in me, but I couldn't. I felt that my lungs would explode due to a lack of air. I could not. I was afraid. I was drowning. I was dying. I tried to hit her with my leg, but there was nothing behind me. My head was getting heavy. I couldn't resist anymore. All of a sudden, I felt her moving away from me. I turned around while I was barely breathing, and I saw him. The little boy was standing and holding her by the neck and throwing her away towards the mirror. She indeed hit the mirror and went down on the floor, but the mirror itself did not break or anything. The boy grabbed my hand. His hand was extremely caudal. My heart was racing up from fear. I heard his voice ordering me to run. I didn't need to think twice. I opened the bathroom door and went out, but before I ran away, I screamed and looked backwards while running. But all I could see is an empty bathroom. Totally empty. I took my keys and my phone and went running on the street like a crazy woman at the nearest police station. I told them all what happened. Of course, no one believed me. They said I was crazy. But I asked them a question. Does any one of you have an explanation for the blue finger marks on my neck where the woman was grabbing me by the neck while trying to drown me? Okay, does any one of you have an explanation for the blue finger marks on my hand? And as I expected, none of them had any answers. I decided to leave the whole country for good, but the last thing I did here before leaving was that I searched up the history of this apartment, and eventually I started to know exactly what happened and why. That poor boy was the son of a man who was very busy most of the time, and his mother was a lady of night parties, so that they used to leave the boy with any nanny they could find available. And unfortunately, the last nanny who was responsible to take care of the boy was a patient at the psychiatric hospital who escaped recently. One day she chased the boy in that apartment until she drowned him in the bathtub, and then she killed herself. She committed suicide in the same place. Since then, anyone goes into the apartment says he saw an old lady and a boy all around the place. But I am the only one who saw the boy while he was saving my life from her hands. I just don't know why me. The first time I saw him, I was 8 years old. Back then I was playing at my parents' room while they were at work. I looked at the mirror and noticed that my reflection at the mirror was smiling at me. At that moment I felt scared, but of course I could not tell anyone. They would laugh at me, and of course nobody would believe what happened. And unfortunately, it continued to happen again. The second time it happened, I was 13 years old. I was in my room studying for finals when I noticed that my reflection in the mirror was staring at me. I thought it was just my imagination, so I rubbed my eyes and looked at the mirror again, and he was still looking at me. I screamed and closed my eyes, completely wishing to be dreaming or something. And after a few seconds, I opened my eyes and he was gone. And everything was back to normal. After 5 years since that incident, it happened again. At that time I used to smoke, so when it happened I convinced myself that it was just the effect of weed. I got up from my sleep on a day of anxiety. I did not know what made me wake up at that time. The wardrobe at my room had a large mirror in front of the bed. I adjusted myself in the bed and I saw my reflection in the mirror still asleep. He was sleeping anxious, sweaty and trembling as if he was having a nightmare. When I looked away and looked back at the mirror, he was not there anymore. It was just me looking at myself as if there was nothing wrong at all. In the next morning, I took a bath and went to the sink to shave. I did not want to look in the bathroom mirror, but in the end I looked at the mirror. Everything was normal. My reflection was doing exactly what I do as any normal mirror reflection. At this very moment, I felt that I know that he just imitates me and that he has an independent person, not just a reflection. And suddenly he stopped imitating me as if he knew what I was thinking of. He stared at me in a challenging way, and suddenly his face expressions became sort of angry. He shouted without a sound and jittered and started hitting the mirror with his hand and screaming without a sound. Within seconds, the mirror got broken and shattered into pieces. I moved backwards in fast steps to avoid the broken mirror pieces. Then I slid on the wet floor. I banged my brain at the end of the bathtub and the world went dark. When I started to gain back my conscience, I grabbed a piece of the broken mirror on the floor. I saw my reflection bleeding and crying. He looked at me in sadness and kept repeating specific words, shouting with them silently. I tried focusing more on his lips and finally I was able to know what he was trying to say. He was saying, "Get me out of here." The first thing that I did after finishing high school was to move out of my family home, which was full of mirrors. I rented a small apartment on my own, a place that was clear of mirrors. I made sure of that. There was no need for any mirrors or reflective surfaces anymore. When I walk past a car and accidentally look at its windows, I see him trying to imitate me with boredom. But I didn't pay attention to him at all. One day while I was having lunch at a restaurant, I saw him on the reflection of my glass cup. I could see his extreme anger through his eyes, as if he wanted to burn me alive. His silence began to remain terrifying and frightening. I began to pretend that he was not there so I can keep going with my life. Things kept on that way until one day while I was preparing dinner and heard the sound of a loud fight in the corridor next to my home. For a moment I looked at the window while I was cutting the meat, and in hindsight my eyes came in contact with his eyes in the window reflection. His eyes were flashing madly, in anger, and he raised the knife upwards, and then he slowly started to cut his neck, slaughtering himself, his lips screaming without a sound, the blood drowning his death while he was screaming. I remember nothing after seeing him killing himself. I remember nothing except that the next time I opened my eyes, I saw the police around me and I was handcuffed into a bed. Most probably a hospital bed. The police told me that one of my neighbors heard me shouting, and when he reached the police and broke the door to check on me, they saw me on the floor with a wide throat cut, and the blood was all around me, my family, my neighbors, and the police saw that I was in danger of myself and decided to put me in a psychiatric hospital. When I told them that my reflection is the one who tried to kill me, no one believed me. In the psychiatric hospital, they used to give me a lot of medicine, so much that it started to give some results at the end. After some time, when they felt that I was doing okay, they started to give me a mirror to look at for a certain time every day as a kind of treatment. But of course it is not allowed to leave any kind of sharp objects, neither any reflective surfaces in my room. One day they brought me a big mirror to look at. My reflection that day was imitating me very calmly. There was no strange thing at all. Suddenly he started to move his face, so I moved my face. He opened his mouth, so I opened mine. At that moment I started to get confused. I am not the one supposed to imitate him. Here he noticed a confusion look at my face, and suddenly he started laughing hysterically. He was playing me. Here I made sure of the matter. My reflection will not leave me. It will try to kill me as it did the last time. I am surrounded. All the mirrors of the world are conspiring with him against me. That is terrifying. My reflection is waiting for the first suitable chance to kill me, so I made an important decision. I must kill myself before he kills me. They told me that I must say what I feel as a form of psychotherapy. I told them everything, but I won't tell them what I'll do to myself. I will get rid of him forever. And for you, whoever is listening to me, do not ever look at the mirror. Back in 1974, my village, which I would rather not mention its name, was going through a brutal civil war. Each day was a nightmare. Bombs and fires were everywhere around the village. The international media did not give us any sort of attention, because of course, it was a small unknown village, so we were completely ignored. The civil war almost eliminated our country to some extent. The salvation of every need ended, and there was no hope in it except that we must run away from here for good. But for my dad, he was postponing our trip to leave the village. He had hopes that the war would end soon, but in the end he accepted the fact that our village and our home will never get back to normal. So when he was almost okay with the idea of leaving the village, We found that getting out of the borders isn't as easy as we thought, and the only way to reach the borders is by going through an old forest. And maybe that sounds great for some people, as going through a forest isn't much of a deal, but for us it was. Everyone in town knew that forest in particular. We've always been hearing about people who went to that forest and never came back. And almost all of us heard of the screams that come out of it every few days, but now it's our only salvation. By crossing this forest, we'll be crossing the borders of our country. So in order to accomplish that plan, we needed Adam. Adam is one of the only one we know who entered the forest and came back alive. Not just once, but many times as far as we know. We went to see Adam, the guide. He kept looking at us sarcastically, looking at our bags with contempt and in a confident voice. He said, "You are not aware of the danger. You'll be putting yourself in a great danger by crossing this forest." My dad approached him and showed him a bundle of money. Adam looked at the cash and said to my dad that he won't take any money till we reach the other side. Till then, we're just corpses, he said. I believe he said that to let us know that the forest trip is literally deadly, and there's no guarantee regarding our safety. Then, he said in a calm voice, "The forest is a dangerous place. You must listen to my words well. Before you enter, you must know that you'll most probably lose someone, and you may lose everything. Nobody enters the forest and gets out without losing. In seconds, Dad told him we are ready. We then agreed. Our meeting point will be at night in front of the forest. When we all arrived, he was there waiting for us. He looked at us and went silent for a little while. And then he said that this trip will be the last time for him to cross the forest, and that if any one of us want to leave, then it's the last chance for him to go back. We all stood without moving. His eyes went through us again while he was breathing deeply. Then he began to say his instructions in an imperative tone. His rules was all about the same concept, that we must obey his orders and instructions. No matter what happens, we must obey what he says or we will be exposing ourselves to the forest. He was talking about the forest as if it was a creature, not a place. Afterwards, we all started to follow him inside the forest. The main instructions were pretty clear to us. To always look upwards, towards the sky, and never look down. Whatever happens, we must keep looking at the sky and keep walking behind each other's after him. At first, it was kind of a hard way to walk without seeing what's in front of us. We were stepping on each other's legs and keep hitting each other. But after a while, we used to it. But my little sister started to complain that her neck was in pain from looking up. The guide did not speak after hearing her complaints, but I felt he was not happy with letting us bring a little girl in the first place. I decided to hold my little sister and cover her eyes with my jacket till we arrived. We kept walking. The forest was like any forest. After a while, the pine trees appeared in front of our eyes while we kept looking up. But for a minute, I noticed something. There is no sound in the forest except for the sound of our steps. No sound of animals. No sound of insects. No sound of anything at all. After a while, my aunt was the first person to speak. With a tired voice and an interrupted tone, she said if we can rest for a few minutes, as she was tired. The guide ignored her words and kept walking. As if no one spoke, my aunt's husband began to get upset. With an angry voice countering the guide, saying that his wife needs to rest, we have to stop for now. The guide got more annoyed of what he heard and shouted that it's not possible to stop and we must keep moving ahead till we get out of the forest. Suddenly, my aunt stood up and was stunned. She kept saying that she's hearing her sister's voice. I looked at my cousin. From his eyes, I was sure that he could not hear anything. My aunt said with joy again that she's hearing the voice of her sister, and for the next 5 minutes, my aunt and her husband kept talking about the voices they hear, and they concluded that her sister must be in the forest with another group, and that they should join her instead of this group. The guide replied to them saying that this is all a trick from the forest to grab both of you. Do not listen to those voices and keep moving and don't fall for that trick. My dad looked at my aunt's husband and tried to help the guide by telling them that he don't hear anything. But unfortunately, my dad's way of helping them did not work. My aunt and her husband decided to walk towards the voices. They tried to grab their son with them, but he rejected and decided to follow the guide's instructions. Moments went by after them leaving our group. Then we heard their screams. The type of screams that make your body shivers. We continued our journey in fear. We were all walking silently, looking up and walking behind the guide without words. My neck was in much pain at this moment. All that I wanted to do for now is to look down and let my neck relax for a little while. But I ignored this feeling and preferred to continue my journey behind the guide. Suddenly, my grandmother stood up and said in fear that there's something moving behind the trees. The guide's voice was annoyed as he was saying there is nothing there but the forest. My grandmother said the same thing again as if she didn't hear the guide. I looked around the corner of my eyes and really noticed something moving behind the trees. A huge thing that is black in color, moving without sound behind the trees. At first I thought that it was a deer or something like that. But in fact it didn't have horns. And this baffled me even more. I immediately got my focus back up again and continued centering my eyes at the sky. At the same moment I heard the guide talking in low voice, ordering me to never focus on anything but the sky till we reached the end of the forest. Then we suddenly heard my grandmother fall on the ground with screams while shaking and calling us to help. The guide immediately ordered us to not look back and continue. And that's exactly what we did. In no time the guide started speeding up his steps and we all walked behind him in the same tempo without any questions. While looking up, I noticed that the trees began to change shapes. The branches was sort of morphing into a shape like hands. These hands were trying to grab us as long as we were walking. I knew it was not real. My cousin whispered to me in a frightened voice asking if I'm seeing hands moving around us. I didn't reply and kept walking. After a while, we began to see cages made of branches and people were trapped inside those cages. All of the people inside the cages were skeletons of people who had died for a long time. Except for one cage that was near us, one of which was a young woman inside. Alive, she was asking us to join her and to help her. She said that if the roles were reversed and we were the ones inside the cage, then she would of course help us to get out. My dad suddenly started moving towards her. The guide shouted firmly to not go anywhere and keep walking. My dad did not listen to him and kept walking towards the woman. And from the corner of my eyes I watched the hands holding him. I heard the sound of the woman laughter. It's impossible that the sound of this smile is coming from a human. The guide at that point gave a strict order to keep moving. As he felt I would go after my dad, I started to move while I was trying to hold my guts together. At least to not scare my I-folded sister who's sleeping on my shoulder. I was moving slowly at that point. The pain was unbearable. Both of my neck pain and my pain of losing my dad. Adam did not lie when he said that we'll lose something in return of crossing the forest. Because of the civil war that lasted for years in my country, I was used to know how stepping on a dead body feels like. And while I was walking behind the guide, I felt that feeling once again. There were dead bodies under my footsteps. Their bones were crushing under our steps as we kept moving while forcing our eyes to only stare at the sky. The guide kept walking with confident steps, not hesitating, not afraid. After a while a light began to appear far from the middle of the trees. The light was getting stronger and dictated the whole place. I heard my cousin's voice thanking God that this is almost over, and suddenly I heard the sound of his scream. He was shouting hysterically. I would have been hysterical. I was about to look back when I suddenly heard the guide warning me to not do that. He told me if I did so, I'll be risking my life, and also my sister's life. I did what he told me. I kept walking and forcing myself to ignore my cousin's screams. After about half an hour later, we arrived at the end of the forest. I was still hearing my cousin's voice screaming in unnatural pain, but now since I made it and crossed the forest, I won't look back. In front of my eyes was a country that is much cleaner than my old hometown. Beautiful roads, and a much nicer place. The guide was so tiring and painful, yet he was the reason I am still alive till now. I paid him the money that my dad left in my bag. After he took the money and started walking away, I shouted at him to wait. He stood up while he was anxious with his eyes full of curiosity. I said to him, I know what happened to each one of them, but I could not understand. What happened to my cousin? He looked at me and said that what happened to my cousin was because he looked down. He saw something that he should not see. That was the last time I saw Adam, our guide. After a few years of that incident, I met some old folks from my village here in New York, and when I asked them about Adam, they said, When he got back after the last time he entered the forest, he started to act very strangely. And then he returned back to the forest by himself. They say he never got back again from the forest since that day. What they said didn't shock me. I know what Adam went through. I have the same feeling as if I was still in the forest and something is attracting me back there again. I've already bought a ticket back to my country. I have to find out a meaning for all of these. Hey guys, thanks for listening. This is Liam. That was all for today's episode. What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more daily horror stories. Till next time.